I can definitely talk about Wood versus.
Oh yeah.
I always mess up the last name. Is it Philly?
Feely.
Feely.
Thank you.
If you think of like it's the that's why the nickname works.
Yeah,
Touchy
his
Feely.
nickname is Touchy.
Oh
Feely.
God, that's horrible. I never thought.
No, it's a great nickname.
I think it's a good nickname because it works on 2 levels.
Oh, I'm inclined to agree. Then it's a great idea.
It's so accommodating.
He's both a touchy person, but also he is touchy and feely. I respect stupid nicknames.
Let's be honest. We have enough The Reapers and Ares and 19 different hands of stone. Any nickname which is like reveals that the fighter has a sense of humor about themselves.
Who is Ares? I don't remember that.
That was
Who's
one
Ares?
of
Rory McDonald.
Yeah, that was his like 7th nickname. He kept changing it, and they were all like they came out of the
all
mind.
edgelords,
Yes.
like Xbox Live nickname
Yes.
type stuff. I'm surprised he never. I mean, I only think it's because he probably never watched that, but he would have called himself like Super Saiyan Rory McDonald.
Yeah. Had he not
Been
retired when he
slightly
did, we were 3 months away from him being Rory XXX, the assassin XXX McDonald. We're very close to getting that. Hello, one and all, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie.
Had dead air for a while.
Yeah,
but,
that was great.
Might bring it back for an important fight card.
It really hurt to experience that. And we, fortunately, that's not the only person on the show aside from me today. We are very happy to be joined by return guest analyst Dan Albert. Dan, thanks for coming back, man.
Yeah, sure. I'm supposed to technically be retired, but for some reason I have a mental disorder where if I get interested in something, I can't stop thinking about it. So, so when people ask me if I'm like still here, the answer is yes? ? Mm-hmm. And God help us all, because it's a detriment.
Mm-hmm. Do you do you have a girlfriend, Dan?
No.
Okay, you got to get one. That's what they're for.
That's possibly true. I don't know.
Whatever thing you're just tirelessly fascinated with, and like nobody with any vested interest in spending time with you wants to listen. They get home from a long day at work at their real job, and you just torture them with trivia.
Oh, that's a great idea. I've always believed in Schadenfreude.
That's a girlfriend's main purpose, in my experience. Well, we're welcoming Dan back to the show. We welcome all of you as well. Obviously, we have a big card on the horizon. Although I think, as we mentioned last week, Phil, it's got it's going to have all the ups and downs. It's going to be an enjoyable card. It's weirdly short on relevant fights for a pay-per-view. It's got all the names, a lot of blue text on the Wikipedia page, which is always a good sign because that's the kind of simpletons we are. But, maybe like outside of the big fights, Bobby Green versus Michael Chiesa is the best booking on the card. And that's, I think we agree, a fairly predictable matchup. So we shall see whether we get the right amount of excitement, depression, and boredom that we expect out of good cards. One way or the other, we have an absolutely fantastic main event. I don't give a shit about the BMF belt, which is obviously fake. But if that's the justification the UFC needs to make awesome non-title main events, then I will happily accept the BMF belt's existence. We have Dustin Poirier versus...
I'm not accepting the BMF belt's existence.
You know what? For a brief moment, it was kind of a funny idea.
Yeah, it's just the fact that, it's something that the UFC would only have prayed in its wildest dreams that could be given a legitimacy by, two of its most storied sort of from the street action fighters because it's such a dumb idea. And it's like, now, look, we can have fights which contractually are for a title.
Yeah.
The belt itself is completely imaginary and utterly up to our discretion, has no linearity to it. It can simply be deployed as we see fit.
To be fair, that is...
Colby Covington can now legally main event pay-per-views for us because we could say, like, he's fighting for the BMF belt because, he beat Tyron Woodley.
He's obviously a BMF. That's why he has tears in his eyes. Yes, Dan?
I'm glad you brought up Colby personally, because for those who are wondering, like, if the BMF title is just typical UFC behavior, just remember, for Usman Covington, too, they produced the worst cartoon promo of superheroes you have ever seen in your entire life.
Oh my God.
It gives you... I don't even want to call it secondhand embarrassment, because that's giving it too much credit. Let's call it third-hand embarrassment. But yeah, it's just kind of typical, like, I guess whatever this company does as far as, like, giving, like, anyone anything, but at least, like, this main event is spectacular.
Yeah.
I think they're two fantastic fighters. It's a great fight.
Yeah.
Both of them got brutally finished by, like, another guy, which is, Charles Oliveira, who indeed has like finished pretty much all of the sort of modern violence kings. The idea that like this is for some kind of badassness belt is really silly, but it's a great fight, and I'm happy to see.
You know what else is silly? Actual UFC belts. I'm just saying, it's not that much. It's stupid, but like the belt looks fucking stupid. It's corny, and it also has like no real legitimacy. I mean, look what's been happening with the light heavyweight title. They, as far as I can tell, they continually forcing champions to step down and abdicate the belt so they can use it to prop up some other fight.
Because they just need to have a constant stream of like champions in order to highlight pay-per-views, which is why the BMF is such an absolute blessing for them.
Yeah.
Because they can just deploy this whenever they need it. Admittedly, like, it's not the worst like example of it, because these are two sensational action fighters.
Yeah. I mean, I just think the BMF belt serves to highlight how silly the whole belt system is in the first place. Because, sure, why not? This is for a title. The fact that they have to, like, make up a title, apparently, to be, like, within the letter of the contract with ESPN, as far as I can tell, that's what the case is. Whatever. We're not going to be complaining about the fight. It's Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje 2. Have we even said that yet? This has been a very long preamble, but it's an absolutely fascinating fight, even more so, in fact, because we saw it the first time. And literally the only way you could knock that first encounter is by comparing it to some of Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje's other fights. Because these are two guys who basically set the bar for absolute insane action. I would say they are both, in different ways, carrying on the Matt Brown legacy of being technical brawlers. Two guys who are absolutely down to have a chaotic, double-edged 50-50 fight with anyone on any day. And no surprise, that's the kind of fight they had with each other. So, Dan, you're our guest. You, in fact, specifically asked to come on the show to talk about this. We're your girlfriend, I guess that means.
Whoa, okay.
First of all, I love you. And secondly, why don't you kick us off? What do you make of this matchup? What do you think might have changed in the years since their first fight?
Well,
Do we have to nod and say at like certain points?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Very. First of all, Connor, I'm very flattered you feel that way, but I don't think I'm capable of reciprocating any human emotions, so moving on.
That's great. That's how a real girlfriend works, too.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so these two. So I think the best way to start talking about this is fight one, and in layman's terms, The fact that you could conceivably say that their first fight with each other is maybe not the craziest fight of both men's careers says it all.
Yeah.
Because, good Lord, that fight was very, very marginal. It came down to just a few things. The big thing with fight one was that it came down to basically whether or not Poirier could fend things off with his jab to set up the straight left, or if Gaethje could get that inside counter kick going. And they had different successes off of that, because every time Poirier was able to work, he could draw Gaethje's guard, because one of offensive-based Gaethje's problems is that he has a very defensively responsible guard, but like anyone who uses a high guard, you can draw it out.
Yeah.
And Poirier realized, oh, I can just keep working this over and over again when I draw it out. So that made Gaethje kind of afraid to exchange. Until Gaethje figured out, oh, I can keep cutting you off and just punish your resets with kicks over and over again. So it kind of became just this really, really back and forth dynamic until Poirier, who might have been 5 kicks away from being done, Jesus Christ, his quad was partially torn because of that fight. I basically drew Gaethje's kick out with a jab and then finished him. So kind of with that, the question is how much have things changed since then, and kind of what kind of fight are we going to see since? So I would say the most obvious thing is Gaethje's style has kind of changed around a bit, and that's its own kind of intriguing conversation that we can save for later. But Gaethje kind of changed kind of his tactics around big time. So one thing with pressure-based Gaethje is I think he kind of ran this kind of game where he was favoring his own attrition and to wear you down before his own gas tank kind of came out.
Yeah.
And because of that, kind of the risk he made was that I'm going to gamble that I'm tougher than you. Against guys like Alvarez and Poirier who could make margins work, that kind of didn't work out well.
Also, notably, two guys who really diligently had their own attritive weapons. Both guys did an excellent job working Gaethje's body and working around that guard.
Yeah. And so for all the success and hell he put them through, that's kind of a huge difference maker.
Yeah. So
Gaethje changed his style around, and this whole facet is very interesting and kind of probably warrants a longer thing, but he became more of an outfighter. And, well, offensively, Gaethje always loved to counterpunch and was very dangerous doing it. The style he's kind of catered towards is relying upon those single counters and drawing you into more traps.
Mm-hmm.
But what's kind of weird about it is, well, he's become far more defensively focused, especially with upper body movements. I think the big problem now for him, and this is one of the big reasons why Oliveira and Nurmagomedov beat him, is that I think he sacrifices a lot of the initiative he previously had.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas early UFC Gaethje was too much initiative, now you kind of have a Gaethje who's lacking some of his initiative until he figures some things out later. So that Fiziev fight is kind of an interesting case because it's very impressive how he handled some of Fiziev's tactics, especially later on. The problem is he kind of had to figure out what that one tactic was first, especially behind that jab. And
you say first.
I go ahead.
It took a while to find that jab. That is the main thing I remember from that matchup.
Yeah, and it's kind of the same with some other fights too. He even had an adjustment against Nurmagomedov, pivoting behind the left hook.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it was kind of a little too late for that to kind of make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the interesting thing about Gaethje right now. He kind of I don't want to say he's lost, but I don't really know if he's figured out a comforting thing for his style. But he's still such a force that everyone who's fought him could probably say he's still one of at minimum one of the harder fights.
Of course, yeah. It's the funny thing. It's sort of I think Gaethje's a fascinating case study in the durability of of stylistic traits, in that he basically, I remember he specifically cited Yoel Romero as an inspiration when he tried to change his style up, because he was like, my God, this guy doesn't do anything for 12 minutes, and then he just wins the fight, and he hardly takes any damage, which wasn't always the case in Romero's fights either. A lot of times against the really good opponents, not doing anything caused him to take a lot of damage. But, that was Gaethje realizing that he didn't have to be a come-forward brawler. The irony, and maybe this is just something in Gaethje as a person, is that his fights still, he only wins them when they become brawls. Unless he's fighting the corpse of Tony Ferguson, then, and I think you hit the nail on the head, it is because now he has sacrificed his ability to grab the initiative. And so if the opponent is willing, they are still going to bring a hellish fight to him, and he is going to have to adapt to that. And he's playing around a lot more off the back foot, relying more on his counters. But now it's like the brawl just comes to Justin Gaethje, rather than Justin Gaethje forcing it outright. One way or the other, he's still a brawler. So it's very difficult, I guess, to change. He still, all the smartening up he tried to do, he did not develop a style that actually saved him from insane violence.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the basic thing is that both of these stylistic changes are built around the underlying truth that he is someone who throws so hard he almost falls over.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he has, I think, probably the most encouraging thing we've seen from him in years is the fact that he was able to start jabbing up Rafael Fiziev.
Yeah.
It is also the fact that it took him like 2 rounds to do that.
He also used his jab well against Michael Chandler, but again, it was not like immediately present.
Hmm. But yeah, I mean, the issue is that previously he would start coming in and trying to build massive exchanges by just like swinging at the other dude and just being happy to trade low kicks for punches. And, being, as Dan said, it's like kind of being confident that his attrition and his damage would wear out and would win out, and that he'd just outlast his opponent and outdamage them, and he'd be able to throw harder and hit them more and all this other kind of stuff. And then he became like this counter-punching, more defensive style. But again, the basic thing is that he's looking for huge punches, like off the back foot, where he's just gonna swing his sort of classic turnover right hand or his rolling left hook. He's gonna throw them when he's sure that the opponent has overcommitted and it's time to throw the big punches and get into a big punching fight. He's not looking to create those exchanges. He's looking to kind of capitalize off them. But it's still the same basic thing. Like you could in their first fight, a lot of his low kicks were actually counters, because it's really hard to low kick someone in an open stance matchup, because they can. It's just dangerous because they can just turn their knee in, and it's a really easy check. So
and it's a much farther target to chase than the near leg.
Hmm. Even in even in that fight, I think he was still kind of looking at counter-punching or counters in a way for a lot of his damage. A lot of the low kicks, as I said, were kind of thrown at the end combinations once he'd been put into a situation where he was a trading situation in the pocket. And the thing is that Poirier, like Alvarez, could just throw lots of volume at him to make him unsure of when the right time was to counter. He was throwing lots of soft volume, lots of like non-committal jabs, and he was just looking to get the guard up, and then as soon as Gaethje was moving backwards, he would then just try and hit him as hard as he possibly could, because he knew that whoever was coming back, it probably wasn't going to be a low kick. And this wasn't a bulletproof strategy. It was still one which had Poirier essentially on damage throughout the fight.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Gaethje was starting to catch up with him. So I think we have a sort of two stories to think about here. In one, I think we have a much more passive Gaethje, who Poirier simply will have sort of an easier time building up a lead on, because he won't be looking to create as many collisions, and I don't think there's much in Gaethje's recent run to say that Poirier wouldn't be able to just replicate that. Like, he's still not really looking to create exchanges with low damaging strikes at that stage in the fight. But there's also the possibility that we get a much more, that we can get, jabbing Gaethje, who can actually, begin exchanges rather than just looking to end them with more power and more attrition.
Oh my God! Tell me, I don't recall clearly. Did he jab Fiziev when he was southpaw?
I am just trying to look this up
because that is a very important question.
I think we've talked a lot about Gaethje a bit, but I do think it's worth bringing up the other half, like Poirier, quite a bit. So the thing about Poirier is one aspect of Poirier that I don't really think people remember is Poirier is he's got a lot of recklessness in him as far as exchanges go in a similar way Gaethje does as far as overthrowing.
For sure.
But like Phil emphasized, the thing that separates Poirier a lot from most strikers who are like that is the constant understanding of how to use his volume and how to take heat off of shots to create those better openings.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a reason why Poirier is still one of the most terrifying pocket threats on the feet in this sport. And deceptively, extremely knowledgeable about, open stance dynamics, because if you rewatch that Chandler fight, even though Chandler kind of just manages to bull rush his way into the fence sometimes, when they're in open space, Poirier is constantly drawing those responses out
mm-hmm.
and just constantly diffusing Chandler with check hooks or straight 8 leads over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And if Chandler isn't the most convincing one to use, because Chandler could be a little rote, think what Poirier does to Eddie Alvarez both times. Eddie Alvarez is, even if he struggled a lot against southpaws occasionally, the one thing about Eddie Alvarez is that dude has a very deep tool set of how to answer questions on the feet. And over again, you would see Poirier laying traps with his jab or his lead straights just to set Alvarez up for exchanges over and over again.
Yeah.
And if Eddie Alvarez isn't a convincing argument for you, think of it this way. The only guy who has competed with Max Holloway in extended exchanges is Dustin Poirier.
Yeah.
And, am convinced, even after hip surgery or, noticeably slowing down all these years, I'm still not sure there is a lightweight that I would feel comfortable saying beats Dustin in a straight-up firefight.
No, yeah. I think Dustin is the quintessential technical brawler, because there is nothing in Dustin Poirier's style that no desire or real ability to prevent a fight from getting crazy, but he has spent all these years tailoring a game which allows him to continuously take advantage of that kind of crazy fight. And that was the real learning experience of their first fight, right? At the time, that loss to Michael Johnson was still fresh in our minds. We hadn't seen the McGregor fights. And it was can Dustin Poirier hold it together in what is sure to be a crazy fight? Is he tough enough, And it just turns out, now we've seen that. We've seen the Holloway fight. All of these amazing examples of Poirier being in complete barn burners and not only being tough enough to hang in there, but continually adapting. And as you say, setting traps and reading the exchanges. This is the big change for Dustin Poirier, was learning to just relax when fights were completely chaotic. And Yeah, I think I 100% agree. I think Poirier is possibly the best pocket fighter in the sport. Obviously, some limitations in other areas of his skill set, but
as far as pure offense goes,
yeah, and even defensively, he's pretty damn savvy. He's like Robbie Lawler-esque, you know. If you want to have a fight with him in mid-range, you're going to have to deal with somebody who's constantly working to figure you out, paying attention to what offense is coming at them, thinking about how they can break their rhythm, how they can interrupt you, not only how they can evade and come back with a shot, but what 3-4 shots they can put on the end of that. And meanwhile, always using that excellent jab to disrupt and create further openings. He's got good footwork. He's got a varied, systematic defense. He's an excellent combination puncher. He is a ruthless finisher. Possibly the best finisher in the sport when he gets somebody hurt. Like, yeah, Dustin Poirier is incredible. And yes, go on.
The thing about Poirier is like the thing is you're never going to have an easy time just consistently finding a range where he isn't going to have some answer to.
Yeah.
And like you're going to have to work for it. Like Khabib and like Oliveira like are the two most definitive wins anyone's had over Poirier in the last few years, but like Nurmagomedov had to like pin him down and basically make his game work, but Oliveira like had to walk through fire and then get those transitions working. Like neither of those fights were like particularly as easy as I think like people will remember them.
No, and neither were particularly impressive Poirier performances either. I think largely because of those aforementioned limitations in other areas of his game. Like I think both are examples where the extreme risk associated with takedowns and grappling sequences really took the edge off of his striking. But the thing with Poirier that makes this matchup very interesting to me, and you know, demands the question like how predictive was their first fight, is that I think Dustin Poirier is way better off the back foot. I think that's where he's at his best. He's got good defense. He has that jab, surprisingly long arms. As I said, good defensive footwork, and he is an excellent counterpuncher. This is largely how he destroyed Max Holloway. He sort of did years before, but the same kind of thing that Volkanovski did to Holloway in their third fight, which is like interrupt, make him insist on extending the exchanges to try to get anything going, and then defend and brutally counter him as he overextends trying to chase you down. And so, like, how different does this fight look if Justin Gaethje is not insisting on coming forward and making things happen? Right?
I mean, just based on how we've seen these guys, I think that I don't think Dustin can resist a back foot opponent really.
No, that's what I mean. He's better off of his back foot, but he is going to come forward. But I think it means he's going to be more susceptible to actually getting countered by Gaethje. He is a brawler himself. He will absolutely take that invitation. I just think he's not as clean coming forward. He tends to overextend more. All of his little subtle tricks and everything, they don't work when there's more onus on him to like be the quick advancing party.
I'm kind of two minds about where Poirier is at his best. I would say like when it's neutral space, it's probably where he's at his best because, well, I agree he's probably more like sound as far as footing goes on the back foot. Conversely, on the back foot, he has way less space to work with continuously. So it's kind of a double-edged sword for him whichever way he goes, but I think in this matchup specifically, with how Gaethje fights, it's going to be a huge determinant of how some things look, because I do think in some ways this fight's going to look a little different than fight one. The question is kind of how it looks, and I don't really know. And it's kind of contingent for me on how well can Poirier set up longer exchanges on those front foot or set the traps that he likes versus is Gaethje's upper body movement and feints or responses into counters going to give Poirier a hard time opening those things up. Yeah. And so that's kind of my read on those things, but the one thing I don't have a problem saying is that if longer exchanges start happening, I don't think that's going to go Justin's way.
Yeah. My instinct is still that whether it's what Dustin is best at, initiative is incredibly important in a fight. And Gaethje taking, maybe he goes back to his roots for this or something. Who knows? Although I kind of doubt that because it literally did not work last time. It almost did, but it didn't. So my feeling is that Gaethje basically allowing Dustin to get rolling and to start getting enough initiative early to start just coming up with all kinds of ideas. It may not be Dustin's strong suit, but it will mean he's going to have a lot of time to figure out what works and what doesn't. And and I don't think he necessarily has to insist super hard on just coming forward either. As you say, Dan, I mean, it's a good distinction that sort of in neutral space, in kind of a fencing match, Dustin Poirier is very strong, largely because he has that jab. He can use a lot of his kind of back foot moves without just allowing the opponent to walk him down. And if he can have that kind of fight, even if it starts slower, I have a feeling Gaethje is going to allow it to start slower, and that just feels like it works better for Dustin Poirier to me. Because he's going to be getting in that jab, and he's going to be... Yeah. I mean, Justin Gaethje's defense hasn't evolved that much. He'll pull out some different moves from just the ducking down into his high guard. He will use some slips. He'll use some pivots to find counters and everything. Even these, like the jab, don't tend to appear until after the 7-8 minute mark when he's kind of had enough time to read the opponent. Even so, there's still a lot of Justin Gaethje having to kind of weather the offense that's coming at him by covering up. There's still a lot of him instinctively ducking down and just changing levels. There's still a lot of predictable reactions for Dustin Poirier to work with as the superior combination puncher. So,
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I feel like in general, Gaethje's change in style is, as we sort of alluded to, is more pronounced and probably worse for the style matchup, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, let's not forget, he almost won that last fight. Same as the Eddie Alvarez fight, Yeah.
I mean, I think, Gaethje just decided he wanted to move from almost winning fights to actually winning fights. But, in much the same, most of the fights that he has won have been fights where you're just like, you would have won these however you fought them.
Yeah.
We sort of talked beforehand about how the Chandler fight was just a nice style matchup for Gaethje to beat. Similarly, incredibly old Tony Ferguson,
and in fact,
who we didn't even realize was super shot at the time.
Yeah.
I think the other thing. So there's one other thing to mention about this fight, and that is the potential that it goes to the ground. Gaethje has sort of talked about his takedown game a bit more. He did, try and take down. Did try and take down Fiziev, I believe. So
I don't buy it at all.
About Fiziev. Yeah. I mean, I don't think he's going to try and take down Dustin Poirier. But the fact of the matter is, knockdowns, weird clinch situations. We talked about this before. Sometimes it hits the ground in a fight. Sometimes something happens and it hits the ground. If that happens, Dustin Poirier is a much better grappler than Justin Gaethje. If we're talking one of these guys is just going to be trying to escape and the other guy is going to be trying to impose his will. Dustin obviously has his flaws in terms of his takedown defense, his cage craft, so on, and jumping the ghillie, of course.
Yeah.
But as an offensive grappler, he is very, very good. He finished Anthony Pettis, aside from that being like a weird Anthony Pettis thing, he was fucking him up on the ground.
Yeah.
He's an extremely effective offensive grappler.
Out-grappled Jim Miller. Submitted Michael Chandler in his last fight. Yeah, Dustin Poirier is a good grappler, for sure.
I do have one thing regarding, any ground things or tie-ups, because I definitely agree on the whole if the fight hits the ground side, but one thing that I would be very interested in if Gaethje did this is before Gaethje came to the UFC, and he's shown shades of this sometimes, Gaethje's whole style was predicated a lot upon that single collar tie clinch game. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that second round with Dustin, he kind of fucked him up a bit there. And Dustin Poirier is not a slouch in a clinch situations, and neither is Gaethje, because both of them had some answers to Oliveira. It's just Charles Oliveira is one of the best clinch fighters in the sport. It's understandable, but I would say if Gaethje has to weaponize tie-ups in one way, that is something that I have been wanting him to do for a while, because I do think he and his team have kind of forgotten he was very effective there in his early career. Now, having said that, though, the number one question for Gaethje, and honestly, for me, it's kind of a foregone conclusion at this point, is he has these two styles. Is he ever going to find a way to merge them together to be super effective? I don't think we're at that point anymore, because honestly, these two have had war zone careers, and they're both not getting younger, so they've probably plateaued at this point. So I wouldn't bet on that, but there's still some interesting looks I think both guys can give each other in this fight consistently.
Yeah. I think personally,
I think he actually, that was Gaethje's first knockdown of Oliveira, wasn't it? He landed a right hand, but then he grabbed the left collar tie and then dropped him with a bus driver uppercut?
He still does that. He did it against Fiziev as well. Yeah, just grabs back your head and just hockey punches you to death. No, absolutely. And let me be clear. I was not saying before that I doubt Dustin Poirier, or that I doubt that Gaethje might try to take it to the ground. I don't disbelieve him that maybe he's thinking of that. I just don't think it'll yield anything.
I don't think he's going to be going for anything.
Does Justin Gaethje have it in him? Has he ever demonstrated any ability to control a fight? Or no, he's too crazy. Even if it goes to the ground. The main
takedown he would want to do to people is he wants to physically throw them on their own head.
Yeah,
he can't really do that to UFC level lightweights.
Yeah,
anymore.
He wants to
done when he was younger and crazier and wanted, and much of his style is obviously predicated around conserving energy.
Yeah,
he's not going to be going for wild slams.
He wants those Tim Boach takedowns. But even if he does get somebody down, Gaethje is just he's too innately scrambly and wild and offense seeking.
Well, he is. Let's be real. He's panicky on the ground.
Sure, yeah, he is just in full on instinct. Exploding, going nuts mode. I have never seen an ounce of control grappling or positional patience or method in any grappling exchange from Justin Gaethje. Not even close. So yeah, it's going to be, I think, an awesome fight. I don't think it can possibly be anything else.
No.
But we are expecting Dustin Poirier. I think he's going to get too much of a lead. More than he did in their last fight, probably, and is just as capable, if not considerably more capable than Justin Gaethje at adapting to problems down the stretch. And also, he checks low kicks now and then these days, so that should be helpful.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where, again, as Dan said, it was despite the fact we'd mostly just been talking up Dustin, it was such a close fight.
Oh my god, yeah,
and was so close to tipping when Dustin did the hands on the knees power up.
Yeah, yes,
Which is his final like limit break.
When Dustin Poirier simply stops giving a fuck. It's a dangerous place to be, but it also he has to get to some seriously dangerous territory to reach that point. No question. It's Justin Gaethje could very easily win. Like, let's not pretend this is a one-sided booking. If you saw the last fight, you know that.
Yeah, the thing about these two is both guys hit so hard anyways.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
like, both guys have been knocked out that it wouldn't surprise me.
No.
We saw both guys have to go through dicey moments.
Oh, they both will. I'm sure of it. Yeah.
It just comes down to the fact that if one of them has suddenly slid a bit, I think there's probably a bit more of a case to be saying that, like, even though Gaethje looks a little like his new style might not be fitting him that well, like, you can reasonably argue that Dustin looks a little stiffer than he used to, and hip problems are well documented. But yeah, if just one of them, they're the same age, they've had pretty much the same number of fights, they've both been in same wars their entire careers. If one of them suddenly falls off a little, that'll just be the difference. Like, I'll just get overwhelmed.
And they are just...
and even other than that, if they're just at their peak,
yeah,
it's still pretty close to being a 50-50 fight.
Exactly.
You just have to give small edges to Dustin Poirier.
They are simply two fighters who actively invite fights where shit will just happen. They are not safe fighters. So, yeah, there is absolutely no certainty that the favored guy is actually going to get the win here. That's why it's a fantastic matchup. And that's why we have spent now a full 40 goddamn minutes talking about it, which means it is more than time to wrap up. When we come back, there is a not title fight, although I don't know who is the champion in this division anymore. Jan Blachowicz is taking on former middleweight champion Alex Pereira in a fascinating light heavyweight matchup. And then a little later, I think we are going to talk about that fight that happened back in like July 12th, right, Phil, according to you?
Yeah, we'll be looking back at Spence Crawford.
Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence. Boy, it was great. I can't wait to finally talk about it. All of that
Fantastic.
After this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are continuing down the UFC 291 lineup, which brings us to a light heavyweight fight which possibly has title implications, like certainly... At least one of these guys will probably be fighting for a title with a win, or...
I think it just depends on... My personal opinion is that it depends on how fun it is. If it's like a fun fight, they will just be like, okay, winner, the champion now.
That could be the case. The weird thing is even that seems less important in the modern UFC. Like the number of bookings we've seen this year, and I think this is an insight into how a lot of the other matchmaking is, what's been motivating it, is that, like, for example, Islam Makhachev is getting who did they just book him against? It sucks.
Oliveira.
No, it's not Oliveira.
Why
is Oliveira?
Did they book Oliveira?
Hang on.
They booked against Oliveira.
They had maybe it was a fake announcement, and I just got conned because I'm a rube. No, there was something about it being a disappointing matchup because Oliveira was not going to be ready for the date they wanted. And they had to have Islam in, like, Abu Dhabi.
There were a bunch of people predicting, like, it was going to be Islam versus Chandler, but...
Yeah.
Surely...
Have they booked Makhachev Oliveira?
Yeah.
He is scheduled to fight Oliveira. Yeah. I think there was some insider info which was people may be disappointed by Makhachev's next title fight. So possibly they bullied Oliveira into accepting that. I believe he was originally not willing to take a fight in October. I could be talking out of my ass about this, but at least for a moment, I'm not sure that was going to happen. What I'm saying is that the matchups seem more dependent than ever on just, we have this date with certain like contractual obligations that needs to be filled, and that is going to dictate when the champions defend, and therefore that is going to dictate who they defend against. And I suspect that's why we have now had 2 successive light heavyweight champions abdicate the belt. Which is, like, unprecedented. Like, nobody gives up a fucking...
I personally like my conspiracy theory better. I think it's just a bit, because God knows the UFC needs to be better with them.
What's that?
I'm just always very upset the UFC just doesn't do actually clever bits for once.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just saying this would be a really good bit for a division that otherwise should be scrapped.
That they just continually have the champion get, like, mortally wounded and lose the belt.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, if they're going to have a bit where they're making Sean Strickland fight at the Apex at events nobody watches, I think this is another good example. And then I just got informed that Sean Strickland is now fighting for the belt. Which
that was the other one.
Fucking ruins my bit.
That was the other one. Sean Strickland also got booked against Israel Adesanya. And that one I think is less of, what else are they going to make? That's less of a scheduling thing, but it also does sort of reveal probably why they made that completely heinous Abus Magomedov main event.
Yep.
They're like, oh, Sean Strickland's a terrible piece of shit. That's the kind of guy we like to market. How do we manufacture a title shot? I know. We'll put him in a main event against a completely... And so, yeah, it makes the UFC seem a lot more evil and, in fact, savvy, because perhaps they knew that Abus really didn't have that much and would probably lose to Strickland down the stretch. Which almost makes me wish he'd won. Would have been very funny. They would have been pissed.
I mean, then we could have gotten Magomedov versus Israel Adesanya title fight. Oh,
imagine that. Jesus Christ.
Boy.
Anyway, how the sausage is made aside, there's nothing wrong with a fight between Alex Pereira and Jan Blachowicz. Whatever relevance it may have, it is a fascinating matchup. It is, of course, Alex Pereira moving up to light heavyweight. I have to say, I have far fewer concerns about him changing divisions than I do about most fighters. Because, look at him.
Still going to be bigger than everyone.
Yeah, he is a heavyweight. Like, he's absolutely gigantic. And he has a threshold of skill above the average light heavyweight, which I think should more than make up for any moderate change in, like, speed or strength or whatever. Like, clearly part of Pereira's game works because of how big he is, but he is still going to be bigger. He's a better technician than most of the fighters in this division. Blachowicz is one of the few, in fact, where that is not such a wide gap, where there are certain things that Blachowicz is is arguably better at than Pereira. And so I think it's a fascinating matchup, and I'm basically expecting... if not the best, then a good, effective version of Alex Pereira. What are you thinking, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, this is... this is a good fight for Pereira, and it shows that he is being given a different path through the light heavyweight division than he was being given through the middleweight one. Because... middleweight, they were basically just like, what is the best way we can get this? We can fast forward this guy to an Israel Adesanya title shot.
Right.
He's going to fight these guys. They're all going to try and strike with him. He knocks out all of them, and it's Izzy time. And he's also going to Izzy is also going to strike with him. And there's no real point at which Pereira's ground game or anything is tested, and he becomes champion and then gets knocked out. But This is a different kettle of fish. This is one of the only 2 people in the light heavyweight division who can wrestle. Am I missing anyone, by the way? I don't want to be...
It's him, and who's the other one?
Ankalaev.
Oh, of course. Yeah, he actually may do it a little bit better than Blachowicz.
Yeah, he's a better wrestler. He just,
of course,
gets that a lot of the time. He's just like...
Yeah.
Maybe I'm the best striker in the world.
This used to be a bit...
No, you're not Magomed Ankalaev.
This used to be a bit of a wrestler's division. But it just isn't.
Yeah, a while ago.
Yeah, it's like big, dumb lightweight now.
That is very true. So yeah, this is one of the ones where there is actually a chance that we see Pereira's ground game get exposed, because I think, Glover Teixeira's obviously been training with him a lot. He's talked about, how much harder Pereira has become to take down. He has the benefits of simply being someone with good natural balance.
Yeah.
And, being 9 feet tall and 300 pounds. But I think we can also, we saw in that first Israel Adesanya fight, he's not good on the ground.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to believe he is. I'm willing to believe that, he has developed the aforementioned, the classic MMA 6 months of sprawl training. Mm-hmm. It's, he's going to be quite difficult to take down, open space and on an initial shot. I am not willing to believe that someone who looked like that on the floor is going to be good at it now.
Absolutely not. He has come to it far too late.
So basically, from that perspective, it's that seems like an easy way for Blachowicz to win, and it's can Blachowicz build into his takedown game? And honestly, that's a question that I'm not sure of the answer to. Mm-hmm. Because, if you think of Blachowicz's best performances, they're sort of cautious, kick-exchangey outside affairs where he can pick up counter takedowns on people who overextend on him. He's really best as a mid-range counterpuncher. Mm-hmm. I think in some ways it still works okay for Blachowicz. Pereira is still not great, I think, at initiating his own offense safely. And I think that there's a good chance that this might be heretical, but I think that Blachowicz is a better kick fighter than he is. He's better at defending and stopping kicks.
Yeah,
he's better at delivering his own. So in a sort of mid-range, kickboxing match, there's a good reason to assume that Blachowicz can survive that, especially because he's super durable. But I think the main thing is, what happens in pocket exchanges, because there's just in some ways, Pereira coming forward and being aggressive, I think, allows Blachowicz to play his best game, but it also is counterpunching off the back foot. But it's also something where it puts Blachowicz directly in the firing line for just getting his head punched off. Because as durable as he is, it is Alex Pereira.
There's a threshold where, having a chin doesn't necessarily matter that much. My God, Pereira is 2 inches taller and has an inch more reach than Blachowicz.
There's never a time when I'm gonna. He's like what's it called? He's like Zeno's paradox, but for size. I've never seen Alex Pereira in a picture with anyone.
Yeah,
he's not bigger than them. He's somehow it's just all he does is he takes the size of whoever he's standing near, and then he just multiplies that by the factor of 1.2. He'd be standing next to the mountain from Game of Thrones, and somehow Alex Pereira would be towering over him and making him look slightly small.
Alex Pereira is the first man in history who has actually taken up a picture of him actually holding up the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Precisely.
Yeah, it's not a trick of foreground foreshortening or anything like that. He's just bigger than whatever he's in the picture with.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with that. I also 100% agree that that I think Blachowicz is just the roundly more effective kicker. But while also saying that I think Pereira is pretty good at it. I remember.
I think he's definitely much better.
He's better than he used to be. His kicking was being pretty underrated coming into the Adesanya fights. And I was like, I don't know. I think Pereira can actually be pretty savvy and effective. And like Blachowicz before him, I think one of the main things he really gave Adesanya pause with in that first MMA fight was his ability to check kicks. And to hang out at what Adesanya probably thought, despite the size difference, was really his effective range, and just kind of compete with him there and not absorb too much attritional damage. So yeah, pretty aware of the threats at range. A pretty good kicker, obviously a powerful kicker, but just as willing to just sort of flick out little testing, probing kicks as well. But Blachowicz he's probably one of the best kickers in the sport, and kick fighters, as you said, in that he's really good defensively. Like, I'm not sure there's another MMA fighter who checks kicks as diligently as Jan Blachowicz, which is saying something because this is light heavyweight. Like, nobody in this division is the best at anything. But he is a really responsible defensive fighter at kicking range.
I think I don't really have a comment as far as like kicks or who's superior, but I do think it's going to be an important range for both guys, and I would personally kind of expect it to be pretty competitive at minimum.
Sure.
If it doesn't come down to kicks, what's going to be, I think, interesting is other rangefinders. I think as far as like pocket exchanges go, it's pretty much a far more dangerous thing for Blachowicz for an obvious reason. Like, even if Pereira is not amazing himself in extended exchanges with his tendency to rely upon his leans to get out, and Pereira's kind of more dangerous when he's starting or closing exchanges.
For sure.
Instead of actually exchanging. But I don't really think Jan has ever been that kind of guy with exchanges either, even though he can back you off or uses the threat of combos. He's not really that guy either.
The famous Blocko Blitz is his main method of backing people off, and he has famously and hilariously paid for it more than once.
Yeah. So I don't think either guy also has a particularly versatile rear hand. So for me, one interesting kind of point would be I think Pereira having, for my money, a far more versatile jab adds a bit of an advantage for him if the kicks end up being pretty competitive. Because I do think, for what it's worth, Jan tends to be a bit more upon like the reactive side, because he's so defensively minded with that kicking range, which is to his benefit, but that means he does sacrifice a little bit of initiative in the process, which is kind of like why Ankalaev could get some work done against him. Having said that, though, I think this fight's going to be really strange, because I do think that takedown threat probably is likely to slow Pereira's momentum if Jan threatens with it. And to be honest with you, this is more of a personal opinion. I've never really trusted Pereira on the back foot, or as good in like cage space as he is in a ring. But I also don't think Jan is entirely 100% the guy to take advantage of like a forward pressure kind of style, and instead kind of concede to a neutral fight. So I think this fight might be a little weird.
Oh yeah, I am expecting that as well. And I would add the caveat to the jab remark that I think Pereira's jab is awesome. It's super effective. It's really, really difficult to time. And it is incredibly powerful for a jab, as is everything Pereira throws. I think, though, that Blachowicz has the more reliable jab. Because Pereira is sort of like Justin Gaethje, one of these guys who seems to the jab sort of occurs to him at some point in the fight. It's like, oh, maybe I'll try this, and then it works brilliantly. But rarely does he seem to start a fight like
thinking of that as his way in, thinking of that as his first layer, as his wedge. I think he tends to rely more on the kicks and then sort of allowing exchanges to be initiated by pressure alone and then firing back, or closing people down and setting them up for some left hook, right hand combination. I wish the jab was more present in his game, but Blachowicz may really just have the one jab, but he will throw it pretty willingly and constantly. And he will double up on it, and he will use it to reset his feet and to open the opponent up and get back to space. So I think that'll be a very interesting range. Like, how long does it take Pereira to remember that he actually has a way of getting Blachowicz to make one of those, often effective but technically pretty heinous defensive moves, where he himself is like leaning back and like flinching. And Blachowicz, like Sean Strickland, and perhaps that is a bad sign for Jan, is a fighter whose defense is so fundamentally flawed technically that it really, really relies on whether or not he can see everything coming. If he can see everything coming, his head is moving, he's getting out of the way, he's aware. But if you put him into that position where he's leaning back or something and then you can surprise him, he's not in a position to absorb that shot or to respond. But I also really just think it will come down to the grappling. Jan has said that we got some background noise here. What's going on? Whose background noise is that?
I think that's Phil's.
Phil? Are you is there a lot of TV happening in the background?
Might be. That's odd.
Suddenly it just started coming through. I'm just going to put a marker. We can maybe sort that out and then...
Yeah, nice. Let me just close the door. There's some TV going in through.
That solved it right there. Perfect. You back? No? Phil?
Oh, no.
He'll be back in a moment. There he is. I heard his chair. Okay, yeah, that's good. That solved it.
Yeah, sorry, I had to close the door because it was closed, but my cat knows how to open doors.
Aha. Blachowicz has said that the takedown is not going to be his first resource, that he's going to go to it if he needs it. So some weirdness will happen probably in this fight unless he's talking out of his ass. He also said that he is going to be using, his words, Polish magic on Alex Pereira. I guess he's hexing him and probably has many of his opponents, which the Witcher comparison has never been more true for Jan Blachowicz. He is literally out there trying to hex his opponents before the fight.
Wait, wouldn't like all the potions you need to use in that game be considered PEDs though?
Well, yeah. But, how are they even going to test for them? Only Witchers can metabolize those potions, Phil. They're toxic to humans. They don't even have tests to determine what's in them.
Okay, you are 100% like kicking my ass in Witcher trivia here.
I was just going to say personally that Jan being like a lot older, and even if Pereira's not that young himself, Jan kind of kicking 40 years old is kind of a potential asterisk here. But
sure.
Then again, being told things about magic basically tells me nothing I say matters about this matchup anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like my gut honestly says Pereira because Pereira is younger. He's dangerous.
Going to be way bigger.
He's going to be bigger somehow against a guy who really needs his reach and his range tools to keep people at bay. Who doesn't necessarily thrive when fights get chaotic.
And it really is just the prospect of Jan, like, closing his eyes and running forward and to bear hug Pereira and just accidentally tripping him to the floor that gives me pause. Because I just have not seen good signs from Pereira. He's one of these fighters where, like, the cult following has insisted that this is just like a made-up worry, but it just isn't. You can even see in, like, the training footage he publishes, you're like, ooh, that's not good wrestling defense. Boy, if you weren't way bigger and stronger, that wouldn't work at all. So I don't know.
Yeah. This is 100% it for me. Like, it's the age and... Yeah, it's the age on the one hand. I think the other thing that also gives me pause is just a lot of Blachowicz's cagecraft.
Yeah.
He is a bit American top team E in that I don't think it's really a thing that he thinks about very much.
Yeah, he will just allow himself to be cornered.
Yeah, lots of the time in the Adesanya fight, it was him, like, fighting behind the black lines, essentially.
Yes.
It was the fact that he could often pick up clinches and just physically turn Adesanya around, or occasionally, like, hit a takedown on him, that sort of made that work. Again, I mean, and this is Israel Adesanya. This is not...
Yeah.
This is not an insistent come-forward pressure fight.
No, that was one of a few fights now that revealed that, like, the only thing Adesanya really wants out of all of his feinting is for you to wildly overcommit to something. And that if the result of his feinting is you... Like, Jan was biting on every fucking feint. You know? He was out there, he was reaching with his hands, he was constantly worried that some offense was coming at him and reacting, but it was all defensive reactions, and Adesanya didn't know how to... He didn't know how to work with that.
And so, yeah, if you look at Glover Teixeira versus Jan Blachowicz, notably, like, Glover, the person who trains Pereira in MMA, he just backs him up into the cage immediately almost every single time.
Yeah.
And is presumably going to be saying to Pereira, just do that. Do that. Him up against the cage and just punch him a bunch.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not, like, 100% sold on Pereira in neutral space or back foot in a cage, but, like, he's consistent about pressing forward when he needs to corner someone, and so if you give him that, that's kind of a concern. I guess just to jump ahead, I don't really have a stake in how to pick this one, just because it comes down to, like, a few things I don't want to. So I think just for the sake of it, I'll just pick Jan Blachowicz, but who knows?
Sure. Well, hey, you know what? This is the Jan show. I'm the Jan guy, so I'm glad someone is picking him because I am going to give in to my gut and pick Pereira. I just don't think... Like, it was a marginal thing to an extent, how dangerous it would be to give Dustin Poirier the initiative and whether Gaethje would do that. Here I'm pretty goddamn confident that Blachowicz is going to give Pereira the initiative, is going to allow him to pressure, is going to get put into situations where his reactions have to be perfect, and he doesn't have any more room to backpedal when he guesses wrong. And I don't know. As much as I think he probably will take Pereira down at some point, I also think we saw in the Adesanya fight that, like, Pereira can kind of cope with that. Even if he has to, like, take a round off and be a little more cautious to not let it happen again, it didn't, like, throw a huge wrench in how his striking operated. He came back by the end of round 4 was just looking like Alex Pereira again. So, yeah, I'm going to favor the bigger, younger, harder hitting, more aggressive fighter. I think that's often the right call in this sport.
And it has to be said, like, third Adesanya fight, that was one of the best performances of Alex Pereira's career.
Yeah,
unironically. He got knocked out. I don't care. Like, in terms of everything looked improved. His ability to fight out of the clinch, his ability to, like, start his offense using throwaway volume, his feints, his jab, all this kind of stuff, his low kicking game. It looked great. It was a good plan. was working well.
Yeah.
He just got caught. It's fine.
He's been looking in that and the fight before like what we were hoping to see from kickboxers making the transition to MMA forever. He just looks like he feels like he's way more technically sharp and varied and deeper than these people that he's fighting.
I mean, honestly, he looked like he's one of the few people we've seen. Kickboxers mostly come to MMA and get worse. Like,
yeah, exactly.
An example is let's be honest, Israel Adesanya.
Sure.
Pereira looked like a better striker than he did as like a kickboxer.
Yeah, I totally agree. He looked phenomenal at range in like a measured range fight with Adesanya. He was beating him. It was ironically the lingering too long in the range where he's most dangerous that got him caught. Otherwise, he was doing great. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm favoring Pereira.
I think he's genuinely coming into his own. So and Jan Blachowicz is 40 years old. So I'm going to pick Jan Blachowicz. I'm just watching footage of like Pereira getting taken down by Bruno Silva. And I'm just like, man,
yep.
Like, what if this guy is just like super bad at a really key aspect of MMA?
I think he literally is.
It just happens. Like, even if Blachowicz has to get Ankalaev'd into going for his takedowns, where he's like, man, I wanted to beat him on the feet. Surely I'm the better striker here. And he has to get just a bit of he has to get his ass kicked a bit. Still just what if he just takes him down and then Pereira's suddenly just instantly lost on the floor?
Yeah, gets arm triangled, gets power sweeps his way to top position, but gets arm triangled from the bottom type of thing. He's gonna get knee barred by Jan Blachowicz, like some goofy light heavyweight ass submission is gonna happen.
I mean, this is one of those ones. I mean, there's also the thing that I honestly trust Pereira to go 5 rounds more than I do Jan. Jan has fixed a lot of his cardio issues, but he still looked pretty knackered in the later rounds of that Adesanya fight. Mm-hmm. And it was just that Adesanya was also knackered because he was fighting against someone who was bigger and stronger and was giving up takedowns to him.
Yeah.
And there's so many reasons to pick Pereira here. It's genuinely one of the calls that I would almost always make would be to pick the younger, fresher guy who's clearly on the upswing with the huge power edge. All those reasons. I don't know. I'm just what if he does complete cheeks?
He is obviously actually bad at wrestling, so that's a problem. It is a genuine problem.
Ooh, bye internet.
Oh, we can still hear you.
Now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
briefly cut out on me.
I like to know that would be your reaction in private if we hadn't been able to hear you. That Phil sitting alone in his room goes, "Ooh, bye internet."
Oh no, it had already come back. It went badunk, and then it went badunk.
Oh, okay.
I knew I was back in the call. I was not talking to myself and or my cat.
You just react like Mac from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Ooh.
Yeah, but more heterosexual than
yeah, well, obviously. And less into.
Well, now I'm sounding like Mac from Always Sunny now.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, El Boxeo, Terence, Crawford, Errol, Spence after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. So here we go. Errol, Spence, Terence, Crawford. We're going to pretend that it is happening. It is obviously... Is it the most anticipated fight in boxing? It has to be, right?
It's up there. I know, a lot of people want Fury Usyk.
It's that or Fury Usyk, yeah.
Yeah, I think... But unlike Fury Usyk, which is being put off by Tyson Fury pulling the greatest like escape artist scam I've ever seen. This one actually seems like it's going to happen after reasons I don't really remember why it hasn't, but it is what it is.
I think they both just avoided each other. They both... it was one of those, each guy wanting a 50-50 cut of the purse, each guy wanting to be at what they felt was exactly the right point in their career. I mean, it's classic boxing matchmaking. Like, boxers get big enough, unlike MMA fighters, they actually have some individual power over their careers. And so, and this has literally been happening in boxing basically as long as fighters have been wearing gloves. Like, I was recommended ages ago a great book by, surprise, Kyle MacLachlan on Bob Fitzsimmons, one of the best punchers in boxing history, a guy who was a former blacksmith and used to make horseshoes for the crowds at his exhibitions as a party trick. And he fought Jim Corbett, who was one of several boxers in the history of the sport who were sort of renowned as defensive pioneers. A guy who was like, maybe I'll move my feet and use a jab and be smart and use defense. And these two dudes bit at each other's necks and slung mud and talked in the press about fighting for 7 years before they actually fought. And that was in, I don't have the number in front of me, but I'm going to say 1910. So this has been happening for some time in this sport. It's nothing new. But yeah, what do you make of it, Dan? I
mean, it's definitely one of the fights that needs to happen. I'm not about to pretend I'm as well educated on the whole main boxing scene and all the belts nonsense.
No, you don't
someone
have to
say
know that.
Lukash is, but whom everyone should follow if they want to understand the main boxing scene, because God knows somebody has to.
Sure.
The thing about this fight is it's inherently really fascinating because you have two guys who are at the peak of their powers, so that's obviously going to add things. But also you have two guys who have unique styles and temperaments that I think are just going to inevitably create fireworks of some sort. And that's kind of who Spence and Crawford kind of are at their core. You have Spence who... both of them are more kind of aggressive than they look, but different kinds of aggression. Spence is that overwhelming, pressure in the trenches kind of guy who wants to maul you down and build momentum on the inside, right, until he wears you down to the point of least resistance, or just keeps building momentum until he just takes over. Crawford's a lot different. He's more economical, but he has a unique eye for setups.
Yes. And
he's combined with utterly insane killer instinct. In power, he can take out just about anyone if they underestimate him or he sets up the right moment. So you kind of have one guy who's inevitably going to bring the fight, and you have another guy that if you bring something to him, he's going to respond really hard.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think like a lot of Terence Crawford fights, it's a pretty easy prediction to say that Errol Spence is probably going to start pretty strong here. Because he is I almost just misused the word dictator, but you know what I mean. He is He's
an initiator.
Exactly. He is an initiating fighter. He likes to pressure, as you said, Dan. Not that he's this is the thing with boxing. It's it's actually much harder to put most really high level fighters into such a narrow box, because it's not as if Errol Spence can't fight off the back foot. It's not as if he insists on charging forward immediately. He's not a crazy, reckless swarmer, but clearly there is an inexorable pressure that starts from the jump, even when he isn't coming forward right away. He is feeling his opponent out, looking for where that first crack shows so that he can then start walking them down and spending the rest of the fight trying to trap them. And Terence Crawford is, if you want to talk about boxers being difficult to kind of define in a box, that's Terence Crawford in a nutshell. He is he is like a pure adaptive tactical fighter almost.
starts many fights sort of looking weirdly passive and defensive. Sometimes doesn't, but often does. Just like we'll have an extended feeling out process. I could think of several Terence Crawford fights where it has literally felt like 50-50. Like the first 5 or 6 rounds, he hasn't really gotten going. And then a switch flicks, and Terence Crawford, as you said, a little like Sugar Ray Robinson, is just a shockingly murderous puncher and a brutal finisher, and sort of reveals that he has spent that entire time like formulating traps. One thing I have always admired Terence Crawford for is that he can spend all that time sort of looking for a certain idea. If it's hooking off the jab, or it's jabbing and slipping the counter he's been expecting and finding the uppercut, whatever. And yet, when he springs the trap, it is not like an over-anticipated, I finally have my moment thing. It is, in fact, relaxed and usually comes in successive layers. That's what I really like about Terence Crawford's trap-setting style, is that he sets people up for things still with the expectation, like a good experienced fighter, that they are going to have an answer and that he is going to have to continue after he's sprung the trap. I literally always forget the name. It wasn't Badu Jack. It was one of Crawford's fights around that time. Let's see if I can just grab a name out of a hat by looking at the record. Was it Deary John? No, it was quicker than that. It was Thomas Dulorme, maybe. Yeah, it was Dulorme. Where Crawford, he spent a lot of time just kind of feeling Dulorme out and was using his jab, which he has an excellent one. Out of both stances, he has an excellent jab. And caught Dulorme overreaching on a parry, set him up for a hook off the jab. The hook hurt Dulorme, but it was the right hand which came immediately after the hook that completely crushed him and set up the finish. And that to me is that's my reference example of Terence Crawford's style of fighting, is that he spent this whole time coming up with this idea for how he was going to punish Dulorme's bad habits. And yet, when he finally pulled the trigger, it wasn't just a one-and-done idea. He pulled the trigger and immediately started expanding on the idea he'd spent all that time formulating. So just a very clever, tricky fighter.
I would say the thing about Crawford is we brought up, he fights out of both stances, so he does fall into kind of a switch hitter kind of archetype, but he's not your conventional kind. You would see with Marvin Hagler, he would shift in combinations to keep creating new angles. Crawford's not really like that. He prefers to kind of switch based upon the situation. Yeah. And assess what threats am I given and what is the preferable option for this. Tactical is the opt word to describe Crawford, because he's constantly watching you. He's constantly trying to figure out what he wants to do. And so you can see that as far as his jab. His jab's more of a rhythm manipulating tool that's used for feinting or pot shotting to draw responses out. That's one reason he just completely murdered Ndongo at one point, because it's I figured out that I can draw your responses out with a jab. Literally 20 seconds later, he fakes the jab to draw Ndongo forward and then kills him with body shot counters. Yeah. And it's always setups like that. It's little things too, like when he fought Kell Brook, he realized, Brook's not paying attention to the outside foot position at all. I'll just keep messing with the southpaw jab up here, and then eventually he's going to not pay attention, and I can just take a slight step back and hit him with a check hook from an angle he doesn't expect. Yeah. He's always doing something to gauge or find an opening. The thing about Crawford is, if you push him a little bit, he will respond in kind. So when
that Sean Porter fight, yes.
When Sean Porter got in his face a little bit, Crawford immediately switched on and got right back at him. Yeah. And then Porter had to back off a bit. And then later Crawford finds out, wait a minute, what do you mean the judges have him ahead? Time to kill him.
Yeah.
And that's Crawford in a nutshell. Like, he kind of can concede to the fight's pace a lot, but the moment that he recognizes that something needs to be done, he's a fucking snake.
Yeah.
And just will kill you. Mm-hmm. And that's what's so scary about him.
He's one of the most kind of formless fighters you can think of at this kind of incredibly elite level. Because he's not like aggressive particularly. Mm-hmm. He's got a super high finishing rate. And yeah, you would think, like, watching his early fights, you would be like, this guy is a technician. He is a back foot technician, but he's just a mean fighter. He's just mean. He's like...
That's why I make the Sugar Ray Robinson comparison, because that is my favorite misconception. The first of the four kings is that...
I think you're talking about Ray Leonard, by the way, not Robinson.
Absolutely, my God, I think I've said the wrong name multiple times.
That's okay.
Too many sugars, for fuck's sake.
I was like, Sugar Ray Robinson was indeed very mean.
Ray Leonard is that, people think Marvin Hagler was a crazy brawler in every fight because all they remember is the Hearns fight. And people think Ray Leonard was an incredible, savvy, patient technician.
But, no.
But he was an insane, murderous puncher who finished everyone. And frequently, sort of like Crawford, his fights would take the form of him sort of spending a lot of time trying to figure them out, realizing, oh shit, I'm going to lose. And then just going for it and nuking them. That is like the Leonard playbook that doesn't get appreciated enough. And Crawford has a bit of that in him. But I think he's a little more subtle with it. Like, a lot of times Leonard did just turn into a blunt instrument. And Crawford is it's almost like Yoel Romero-esque. It's clear, it's obviously a lot more developed and nuanced than that, but there is this strange ability Crawford has to just kind of...
He just fights like he is better than his opponent.
Exactly, yeah. He knows he's going to get...
He is. Right. He is, yes, and that's the thing. He always has been.
Yeah,
like,
he's just completely...
You get the impression, like, you look back on this stuff, and it's been like, he's been trying stuff out in sparring. Like,
yeah.
He's just been like, I'm going to spend this whole round fighting southpaw. I'll spend 3 rounds fighting southpaw. And then he'll just shift.
Yeah.
Like, he's got great footwork, he's got great angles, he can counterpunch, he can, as you said, he can be aggressive when he wants to be.
Mm-hmm.
He's like he's such a difficult fighter to get a bead on mentally, because there's it's so much mirroring what his opponent does. The pace is fought at exactly what is necessary all the time. Like, Mayweather was like a very could give away early rounds and figured his opponents out. But Mayweather had a very Mayweather did his best to bring the pace down to his level.
Yes.
Like, Crawford doesn't even really try and control the pace.
No.
He just fights at the pace his opponent wants. And then when he's decided that enough is enough, he just turns the dial up.
He's not a managing fighter. He is a tactical killer. Terence Crawford is legitimately an artist, a knockout artist. He is in there trying to make art. Yeah.
So for Errol Spence, like you said, I think this is one of those ones where Spence obviously is likely to build out a bit of a lead. He's just more likely to assert himself early. He is bigger. I think he might actually technically have a slightly shorter reach than Crawford.
Yeah, but he's got Demetrius Johnson back.
Him,
He's built like a tank.
Mm-hmm. So Crawford won't be insulated by his reach. I think Spence is just going to try and build off the southpaw jab a lot, and I think Crawford is probably going to let him. Other than that, it's just so hard to see anyone not having those tools like taken away over time, because that is what has happened every single time to everyone.
Yeah.
Like, Amir Khan was obviously on the way out.
Yeah.
Like when he fought Crawford, but he talked about afterwards about how effortless it was to, like, even in sparring, like for Crawford to just figure out long punches that were coming at him from far away. Like, he's just, Spence has also, I don't know that I've ever seen Crawford hurt. Spence has been hurt a couple times.
Crawford's been hurt a few times. Yeah. He in fact, I was going to bring it up before. The one Gamboa, yeah, that's the one that sticks out in my mind. And that was the most Ray Leonard-esque performance, where he really just had to switch it on and go into beast mode to kill Gamboa. It was a super difficult fight where Gamboa was hurting him a lot early. But it didn't shake him. I mean, he's completely unflappable, and he does, yeah, even then. This was like maybe his first big test, really, or one of them. And, there's just like this disdain for his opponent's abilities that Crawford evinces. That he's just like, I'm gonna destroy you at some point. It's just a matter of how you want to be killed.
Spence has had some health problems. He had the car crash.
Yeah,
I think also is some eye injuries. I think he got hurt in his last fight, was it not? He got briefly stunned by Jurgis.
It was Jurgis.
Yeah.
He got hurt by Brook for a second. I mean, I'll bring it up later, those specific moments. But talking about Spence is interesting because I think, just jumping ahead as far as this dynamic goes, the thing about Spence is he's going to bring a fight to Crawford, and Crawford's going to have to answer that, which is a big reason why this fight's probably going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
And Spence, however, has a lot of things going for him, though. That means he shouldn't be counted out, even though we've been praising Crawford a lot. It's worth saying Spence is probably the fight everyone's wanted to see Crawford in for a reason.
Yeah. It's just Spence, that there's a magic to Terence Crawford that makes him so fat. It's like watching Roy Jones at his prime.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Spence, the thing about Spence is, like, his main game is he loves to fight on the inside. And he's very creative in his ways of getting there and keeping himself there. You'll see him mainly get there with the established, like, jab threat. Like, whereas Crawford's jab is more of a pot shot tool, Spence is a lot more like a touching kind of tool. Like, he'll constantly be throwing it out to facilitate reads, but he's always inputting information. And then, like, when he gets a reply, he'll step in, and he'll just use different things. So, like, he'll use his lead shoulder to step in behind your jab, and now he's inside. Shovel uppercut to the body. Oh, free underhook. I can then dip into the forearms off of that and turn you. Start attacking the body again. Maybe I might smother my head into the chest area to smother you off of a clinch break.
Yeah.
And then he'll just chain, like, little things together, like level changes into dips. A straight mitt. Maybe he throws a straight left. Oh, I can instantly shift into the inside. Now I'm there again. Touch into the inside to set up a level change uppercut. Now I'm working around your guard on the inside. He's constantly looking for momentum, and when he's on, like, he's constantly pushing really hard.
And once he's on the inside, he's an excellent tactile fighter. Does the boxer's equivalent of wrestling technique. Like Errol Spence is looking for head position. He is framing. He is controlling hands. He does a really good job of using the shoulder bump.
Yeah, I was going to say.
To create space. It's almost like a very short-range jab as well. If he feels a certain amount of pressure against his lead shoulder, that is a trigger, just as if it would be if he felt his jab connect, or he felt his jab getting parried, where then comes the uppercut. When the uppercut comes, usually the right hook comes right after it, etc. But he's a really good positional fighter. Probably the best positional fighter in close range that Terence Crawford will have ever fought.
Yeah, and one interesting point is Crawford does love to use clinch tie-ups for ref separations.
Yeah.
Against Spence, that is a potential danger zone.
That's a good point.
Because, and that's one thing that gives me a little bit of pause, because it's like, we did bring up Spence is a bigger guy, and so even if Crawford is, like, more technically sound and not, like, shallow on the inside, that does give Spence an in to look for. So And Crawford does have great footwork, and Spence isn't a great ring cutter for my money, but that is one thing that Spence is probably going to be pushing for every chance he gets, because we've emphasized what happens when you bring the fight to Crawford. Even in the moments where Spence gets hurt, the thing is he'll grit down harder when that happens. Mm-hmm. Like he can get discouraged, but he doesn't quit. Like, he'll push back. And so that's the one thing that's going to happen here, I'd say. Like, Spence doesn't have, like, the equalizer to kill someone the way Crawford does, but he's great at snowballing and building momentum for every inch he's given. Mm-hmm. But Crawford's going to be the hardest opponent to make those inches happen. And so that's kind of the thing for me, ultimately.
The tie-ups thing is a very good point, though.
Yeah. Like, I mean, that's the thing. Like, the difference is narrow enough that you can totally see, like, that just making a difference. Like, if Crawford gives up early rounds just on volume, doesn't have to drop many late. If Spence can just keep pushing into his chest with his shoulder, making like dirty boxing tie-ups. Like, there is, the ability of Crawford to just fight at this, like, turn every fight into the sort of same simmer is remarkable. There is also a reason why, a lot of fighters don't do that.
Yeah.
That you have to be better than your opponent to treat it like a sparring match kind of thing.
Yeah.
That you have to be able to just turn it up and then kill them. Points. So yeah, that does make it. I think that's a really good point.
It'd be like,
I do have a counterpoint though, because even though that I think that's a big thing for Spence, there are a lot of little things with Crawford for him to exploit. So the big thing with Spence is every moment Spence has been hurt or he's vulnerable, his worst moments are off of breaks consistently. And Crawford loves to attack guys off separations quite a bit. And that's kind of a big deal for me. Because, once again, like, if there's one guy that I expect to get hurt in this fight, at least at one point, it's Spence.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, like, it's not super easy to punch him too much there, because, like, his dips to smother on the inside mitigate some of that, but, like, if Spence gets pushed backwards, he is way, way more vulnerable. And the other problem is, like, Spence's style inherently means he's going to come inside and be susceptible to counters. And he's still kind of dogged that he's going to take one to give one. And against Crawford, who will, like, draw things out and then get that big moment, that is a danger zone to walk. So it's a very, very, like, weird tightrope Spence has to walk here.
The other thing is that, like, obviously if you're... The dynamic is that Spence is simply gonna keep, like, he's gonna keep kind of coming forward and plugging away and so on. If he does get figured out, like, the dynamic will be that he will be coming forward into a blender.
Yeah,
like, he will be continually kind of walking forward into counters.
I think we can expect that at some point after the first 3 rounds, possibly significantly later, but at some point. Terence Crawford is going to find 5 to 7 different ways of uppercutting Errol Spence, who is going to be coming in level changing, hunting the body, keeping his head down, trying to maintain that kind of wrestler's leverage in close. Terence Crawford has 2 excellent uppercuts, which are thrown really well off of nice, like, retreating angles too. So somebody comes barreling in. And sometimes that results in what you were talking about, Dan, with like a break where Terence Crawford is actually still more than close enough to you to hit you, but he feels like he's very, very far away because he has pivoted back, completely gotten out of your sights, and used that movement to load up an uppercut.
Ugas caught Spence with quite a few uppercuts in their fight. He is not the puncher that Terence Crawford is. He is not as accurate as Terence Crawford is, or as subtle. So that is, I expect, absolutely going to be a pivotal kind of shot for Crawford to find. And yeah, I just don't know about the infighting. I mean, it's I'm reminded of Devin Haney, and how everyone was like, this guy just holds, he's punching clutch, he's boring, and then he fights Lomachenko, a guy who is a very good infighter who makes him fight on the inside. It turns out he's relatively savvy there himself, and actually is capable of building some cool ideas and like fighting for position and close when he has to. I suspect we'll see a bit of that from Terence Crawford, but he does often sort of seem just kind of lazy in the clinch. One of my least favorite things about modern boxing, in fact, because there's just not as much emphasis on learning to fight on the inside, because referees tend to break people very quickly. But that being said, if I had expected either guy to shred Kell Brook, who is one of the most annoying, smothering clinch fighters in the sport, it would have been Errol Spence. And in fact, it was Terence Crawford who just nuked Kell Brook, like effortlessly. Granted, I think this was several years later, but I don't know, man. That's the difficulty in predicting Crawford's fights, and also the difficulty in just picking against him against anyone. Because it is like... Again, this is like an unflattering comparison because he's better, but it is like picking a Yoel Romero fight. Like, I don't know.
The thing is that
at some point he's going to win.
Don't get the impression of what his ceiling is.
Yeah, exactly. He just keeps figuring something out, and it usually is something extremely violent against a huge variety of opponents and showing a huge variety of styles. And yeah, I mean, half the time he fights the entire fight in southpaw, and half the time he fights the entire fight in orthodox, and he's just not like other fighters.
And that's why Spence is a good matchup for him, because Spence is going to bring that out of him. He's going to force Crawford to show it.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly why this fight's intriguing. And why people have wanted it for so long, even though, like, both of them aren't as young as they used to be. Crawford especially is, 36 now. And Spence has had, all those outside incidents. But it's, the fact that it's still intriguing says a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I just hope...
It's just that, neither one of them has particularly looked like they've fallen off at all.
No. Yeah. All I can hope is that it's not the kind of fight where afterwards we are saying, I wish it had happened sooner. Because that all too common an occurrence in boxing because these big fights take so long to materialize. But hey, I'm very, very happy we're getting it. It will no doubt be fascinating up to and hopefully through the point that it ends. And I'm going to pick Terence Crawford because I don't know how to pick against him, basically.
Yeah. I kind of got to as well. He's just this kind of cruel, technical void. I just don't know how you make it, how you make him lose.
He's clever, he's unflappable, and he's dangerous, and in every fight for the last 10 years, he's had 12 rounds to find something. That's just, it's just difficult to pick against him when you've seen what he can do in a 12-round fight, sometimes very quickly, and sometimes not till the very end, sometimes because he desperately needs it, sometimes because he just sort of feels like it. But he just doesn't, I don't know. He just figures it out every single time. I have to pick him. Are you picking him as well, Dan?
I think, in some ways we'll have some things tested, like Spence's physicality and pace especially. But, yeah, I think just the margins of error are way scarier for Spence than Crawford here. And that's why you have to pick him.
Yeah. It just feels more like Crawford might lose a decision for the first time. He might finally not figure it out soon enough. But if somebody's getting finished, I'm pretty sure it's going to be Errol Spence.
Yeah, and at minimum, if someone gets in trouble, it's going to be Spence.
Yeah.
All right. Well, 3 fascinating fights. That last one may have been the most fascinating of all. It's going to be a big weekend in combat sports. There's also the Bellator Ryzen thing happening, but we haven't done any research on that, and we're not going to talk about it. We'll see if something interesting happens that we can discuss after the fact. But otherwise, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. I thank you all for listening. It's been a long one, but hey, sometimes we do a super long one, and it's about like 4 completely shitty fights. And then sometimes we do a long one, and it is 100% justified. I hope you will agree. This is one of those occasions. Dan, thank you very much for joining us, man. Really appreciate it. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
And we will have to have you back again soon. Just hit us up. Do what you did this time and say, please let me talk about this fight. I like it. Because
all right.
God knows I'm not diligent enough about asking people to come on, so that's great. That works for both of us.
Okay. Once again, de-incentivizing my ability to try to retire, but oh well.
That's all right. We're happy to have you. We're glad that you're sticking around talking about.
And thank you for having me.
Of course, man. Make sure you check out all 3 of us on Twitter. Boy, I should have had your handle pulled up. Dan?
It's X. It's X now. We have to call it X because that's what the Musker says.
Even though it still says twitter.com and it still says welcome to Twitter when you log in.
Yep.
I don't know.
So I'm going to guess that the X thing isn't going to last very long.
It doesn't seem
stupid.
Like Well, it hasn't necessarily stopped them yet. So.
Good point.
But yeah, what's your handle on X?
It's the pretentiousness itself. It's at typewriting DA.
You know what? I did know that one. Of course, Phil is at Evil Greg Jackson. I am at Boxing Bush. And we will be back next week to basically talk about all these same fights and hopefully some more in retrospect. Just before we sign off, make sure you check out the Patreon. Dan has agreed to stick around for just a little longer to discuss, if nothing else, at least to discuss Nathaniel Wood versus Andre Fili. Certainly the best fight, the most interesting fight from last weekend's London card. And, yeah, if you came here today for the Final Points of Face Punch and you came to the right place, this has been Heavy Hands.